Welcome to Iceland. My name is Gylfi, your honest Icelandic guide, and today's journey takes us to the village of Kópasker on the Melrakkasletta plain in the rural northeast. And we begin with the question, what comes to mind for Icelanders when Kópasker is mentioned? While the earthquake of 1976 is probably the most recognized answer, I'm certain there are many young people who may not have heard of this place at all. And since the village is very small, even on an Icelandic scale, and the earthquake of 1976 was very large, it will play an important role in this video with very special footage from a village on the plate boundaries. So welcome to Kópasker. I would like to start with a brief geography lesson and some travel tips. The village is a part of the vast Norðurþing municipality located on the west coast of the Melrakkasletta plain, which translates to the plain of the Arctic fox. Despite being only 2 hours away from Akureyri, the capital of the north, and just 1 hour away from the village Húsavík, the village Kópasker is often considered a rural village, and everything is actually a bit rural east of the intersection by Ásbyrgi, where we find 3 strong tourist attractions. First, the Ásbyrgi flood formation, and a bit further upstream we find another flood formation called Hljóðaklettar, which is also a geological wonderland. And even further upstream we find Dettifoss waterfall. And these strong tourist attractions can be found along a road that continues to Lake Mývatn. So the northeastern corner of the country is sometimes left out. And we can also put it like this: if you want to leave other tourists behind, it's a good idea to cross the river by Ásbyrgi instead of going upstream with the tourist mainstream. And from the junctions by Ásbyrgi, it takes us less than 30 minutes to find Kópasker. And I'm approaching the village from air this time. The roots of Kópasker reach back to the late 19th century. Around 1880, this location was designated as a legal trading post. And in 1894, the local people founded their own co-op, like actually most Icelandic villages did back then, to take full control of their own trade. And the local co-op led to more permanent development in the early 1900s. So over the following decades, communal infrastructure took shape, and by the 1920s and 1930s, Kópasker had evolved into a recognizable village, and the large stone church, Snartastaðakirkja, that opened in 1929 was one more symbol of permanence. So this story is like many other Icelandic small town stories, except that agriculture was and still is more important than fishing, and shrimp fishing was more important than traditional fishing until overfishing literally wiped out the local shrimp stock in the bay. And little by little, the local shrimping industry came to an end. And it was then in 1988 when the local co-op went bankrupt, and most Icelandic co-ops actually ceased to exist during this era due to general changes in business and commerce. And to lose the local co-op with the shrimping industry was too much. And it was the agriculture that came to the rescue. In 1990, the local farmers established a slaughterhouse built on the leftovers from the old co-op, and that business is still present there today, although there is no meat processing plant there like it used to be. And at its peak, over 200 people lived here, but that number has decreased by half, and the population number doesn't tell the whole story, of course, which actually looks quite well for them today. There has been a strong growth in fish farming in the fjord, which has created a considerable number of jobs, and they are currently building a new fish farm in the village. So when I did the real estate availability check, it came out as a bit of a surprise to find 9 properties listed, or way more properties than I found in way larger villages around there. And that has to tell me that the interest in permanent residents is limited, despite plenty of work. And the lack of permanent growth can for some part be explained with migrant workers who only work here for some time and move on. And since there are plenty of jobs around, it's a bit hard for me to see this village grow from here. As a community, this is more like an industrial and service center today. And while I was making this video, it was announced that there are plans moving forward that involve a big wind farm near the village. And there are of course mixed feelings about that. It could be a short-sighted solution that blocks other more natural growth opportunities, like in tourism, but this is however a community that has limited interest in mass tourism. They are just doing their things like they have always done. This is the kind of town where the farmer comes in with a tractor, picks up the groceries, while the local mechanics replace the part they just ordered for him. Life around here is simple, and the tourists are of course welcome. They have a little campsite and at least one guest house. And when I did my TripAdvisor test with modest expectations, literally nothing showed up apart from a little wool mill at a nearby farmhouse. There is however a little museum in the village beside the church, and although it's not a very large museum, it's quite good for its size and not listed on TripAdvisor. So when I became my own TripAdvisor like I always do, I found out that there are actually 2 museums in the village, and the other museum covers the 1976 earthquake. And that got me curious. So one email later, it turned out that the earthquake museum merged with the other museum into one unit, and the earthquake museum is a separate exhibition there. So yet again, I came across misleading official tourist information. So it's always a good idea to double check. And the 1976 earthquake is actually just a part of a larger geology story that I will have to do justice in a separate video due to how large event that turned out to be. This started all when the frequency of earthquakes began to increase in northern Iceland by mid-year 1975. At first, many of the earthquakes were linked to the new geothermal power plant by Krafla volcano near Lake Mývatn, and gradually it became clear that this was a much bigger event. Not only did the earthquakes by Krafla reach all the way to the sea in Axarfjörður Bay, the land there began to subside near the coast, where this Volkswagen made the news, where the road used to be flat only a few days earlier. And a week after this photo was shot, that is when the big one hit us. And it shook the ground so hard that the people fell, while heavy furniture took off, and every single house in the village was damaged. The town was abandoned immediately, and luckily there were no fatalities or serious injuries. And the consequences of the earthquake did not become fully apparent until the snow melted in the spring, and this was no ordinary event. The first tectonic event of this sort that the science community had a chance to monitor with fairly modern technology. And it was the fracture swarm from Krafla volcano that was the centerpiece in this volcano tectonic rifting episode. And the hill where the Volkswagen parked was just the beginning. The ground deformation over the full Krafla events between 1975 and 1984 was 4 to 5 meters on average, and up to 8 or even 9 meters along the complete fissure swarm. Vertical displacements were also enormous, like this lake came to being when the big one struck, and the ground subsided so much in this area that it left us with a lake that is around 10 square kilometers. And this made this tectonic chapter way bigger event than we have witnessed on the Reykjanes Peninsula over the last few years. And it would have been extremely interesting to monitor this event here in the north with today's equipment, especially because the earthquake struck two earthquake belts that are not parallel, and north of the village we see some of the best samples of tectonic displacements in Iceland. And looking at this from a drone, it raised the question, what part of this came into being during the 1976 earthquake? So I started to look into high-resolution aerial images from 1974 to compare with the 1976 aerial photos available, and it was impossible to see any changes, which made me think, if a 6.3 hardly did anything around here, how large was the earthquake responsible for this? And that is one of the questions that I'm looking into when I do my full video about the Krafla volcano story. And I already found out that this separate fracture swarm under the village is a bit of a mystery, and the largest earthquakes around here might originate on the offshore Tjörnes fracture zone, where the bedrock is colder, resulting in larger earthquakes than around here. So I've become more and more interested in the local geology, and I actually know about a small eruption that occurred here north of the village in 1823, and the ground uplift was detected there after the 1976 earthquake. And it looks as the ground uplift was up to 1 meter. So I'm just scraping the surface in this video, because to do this area justice, this whole sequence of events from 1975 to 1984 takes a lot of work and lots of filming, because I'm not going to show this long and remarkable fracture swarm from a map. And I've already filmed a lot around there and hope to finish that work next summer. And in that video, the Kópasker earthquake will be what it is, just a part of a way larger scenario. And as for other attractions, this is not a very strong tourist village. I am going to recommend that you look at my video about the village Raufarhöfn, closer to the Arctic Circle. That village is in many ways better suited for tourists. This is more of a place to look at Iceland's industrial history, where old agricultural traditions can be found beside this high-tech aquaculture company that pumps up warm seawater from the coast, from local wells, to use in fish farming. And in front of those companies is this thin strip of land with ancient sedimentary layers, which only adds to the mystery how this land ended up in its current state, so skewed and twisted. And where the faults are, that is where the energy is. And although the fjord is not categorized as a high temperature area, it is a huge energy reservoir that could easily, by time, make this region into a powerhouse in food production, often in the form of warm seawater. So I think they have a bright future around here. And I also think it's very short-sighted to ruin the appearance of the peaceful area here with windmills, because we have plenty of energy elsewhere in Iceland. And I somehow think that in 50 or 100 years, we will see something completely different around here. We find this to be rural today, but this village is connected with a fiber optic cable now. It's less than 2 hours away from the international airport in Akureyri, and the worst road obstacle has already been fixed with road tunnels. So in future, that road could just as well become a highway for food on its way out of the country. Although we never know, this is Iceland with its ever-changing nature and elements. That is all I can say for now. My journey will continue soon, and the next episode will be about the Hljóðaklettar flood formation And in the video description you can find links to support this project that will by time become quite extensive, especially since I'm often covering the areas that others won't cover at all. And with that, I'm sending you best regards from my home country, Iceland.